This is Rick Green with today's Constitutional Minute. Yesterday we opened up the discussion of whether quarantines are constitutional. And if you haven't watched that first video, you really should go back to that because it kind of covers the 30,000 feet view of the issue. The answer we found is that yes, quarantines can be constitutional, and most everyone agrees this is a proper function of government to prevent someone with a deadly, highly contagious disease from spreading it to others. But that then asks or opens up the door for a lot more questions. We now have to ask who has the authority to do these things. Who can issue a quarantine? What are the criteria for when government can do these things? And how far can it go? I mean, can you close restaurants and churches? Can you keep everyone in their home? And then, of course, the big one, where do you go for due process if you've been misdiagnosed or if the government measures truly are too overblown for the situation? So yesterday we focused on that first question, who, and we said, look, it's not the federal government. The answer is split. The federal government has a little bit of power. They can deal with people coming into the country. But for the most part, for all of us as Americans, it's the power lies with state and local government. Like most police powers, we would much rather have the local folks have the power to detain you than some faraway federal government. So watch yesterday's video for more on that. Today, let's get into that local power, to quarantine, to isolate, or even just to prevent businesses from opening. I know it seems so anti-American that a government official could order a business to close, even if that business did not have any known cases of the disease or even evidence that particular business would spread the disease. And I'll tell you, when this first happened in mid-March, I mean, my reaction to these governors and mayors shutting down bars and restaurants and churches, it was shock. I said, this is wrong. I mean, especially when some of these orders close certain businesses and not others, picking winners and losers. Some are essential, some are not. And I was amazed as I reviewed these state statutes, these disaster statutes, how much power they give, or supposedly give, at least on paper, to these health officials and to mayors and to governors. On paper, it's essentially unlimited power to do whatever they think is necessary to control an outbreak. So can a mayor or governor close down private businesses? Well, according to these statutes, yes. Can they prevent gatherings of 50 or more people, or now they've gone to 10 or more people? According to these statutes, yes. Should they be able to do so? Well, I would say yes and no. Yes, if your particular business is infested with a smallpox or Ebola or something like that. But no, absolutely they should not be able to do so with a blanket order across the entire state with zero evidence as to whether or not your particular business or location is spreading the disease. So really what we need to solve this in the long run is we need our legislators to rewrite these statutes and box in these out-of-control governors and mayors. Put them in some reasonable restrictions instead of this unlimited power that they think they have. They think they answer to no one at this point. And the way these statutes are written, once a public health disaster or a state of emergency or whatever the particular language is in your state, once that's done, once that's called, man, it's essentially carte blanche for these health officials and governors and mayors. Now, that does not mean that you lose your constitutional rights. Those statutes do not trump the Constitution. The Supremacy Clause of the Constitution trumps them. And we still all have our 14th Amendment rights of due process and equal protection. We still have our protections in the Bill of Rights. They're all being violated, right? Our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble, to protest, to travel, our Second Amendment rights, even our Third Amendment rights with people being literally isolated into their homes and then coming into their homes in ankle bracelets and house arrest. I mean, these things are crazy. Fifth Amendment rights of not having our property taken from us. Businesses are being taken away from Americans right now and lives destroyed and fortunes destroyed and life savings destroyed. Look, the Constitution, as one federal appeals court has already said in one of the cases that we've won on this against a governor, the Court of Appeals, the Federal Court of Appeals said the Constitution does not sleep during a pandemic. And that's why we, the people, have to know our rights. That's why it's vitally important to know what the relief valves are. Where do you go for due process if the power is being abused and misapplied? We have some protections in state constitutions. In my home state of Texas, our Texas Constitution says that no one except the legislature can suspend the law. Well, our governor suspended the law. He put everybody on house arrest and he said you couldn't open your business, you couldn't go to work. And he did it on his own, and we're now 2 months into this thing. So we're suing our governor based on the Texas Constitution, saying that only the legislature can do this. An interesting history fact here for you. That part of our Constitution, it's Article 1, Section 28 of the Texas Constitution. It used to have a comma there when it says it can only be done by the legislature, comma. It then said, or someone the legislature given power to do that. Well, that was taken out of the Texas Constitution through an amendment by the people of Texas 100 years ago, when a governor of Texas used that power to do martial law in a quarantine. How's that for irony, all right? And as a response to that, the people of Texas said no more. One person should not have the power to do that. So our Texas Constitution now says that the governor should not be doing what he's doing. So we'll see how our lawsuit goes, and hopefully other people across the country will do the same thing to try to hold their mayors and their governors accountable. And some of those suits have already been won. So let's talk about what most states have attempted to do to try to keep these abuses from happening. A lot of those state statutes do have checks and measures for how a process like this would be implemented. But those checks and measures are typically about a detained individual having a right to have a hearing before a judge, or maybe due process measures aimed at an individual who's being forced to be tested or hauled off to isolation. That's good. We need those protections in the state statutes. You want to have specific process and protections if that's you or your loved one that's being dragged away to do that. But what's the due process or the check or the balance on these blanket bans, on these gatherings across the board, forcing restaurants and churches to close, where they're applying this to entire communities or entire states with zero evidence as to whether or not that particular church or business is in danger of spreading the disease? Well, the truth is the protections on paper in the statutes, not much. So that means there's not much in terms of the immediate. That's why we're having to file these lawsuits on constitutional grounds, both state and federal constitutions, in order to overturn these over-the-top executive orders. The bottom line, unfortunate take-home message is that if our elected leaders and their appointed health officials believe that they have unlimited power, they're going to exercise unlimited power. If they think the only way to stop the spread and to save lives is to use that power in these draconian dictator-type ways that we've never done in all of our history, then like most politicians in power, we gave them an inch, they have taken a mile. They've taken it as far as they possibly could. And so here's kind of what it boils down to and what will determine which lawsuits win and which lawsuits lose. Government has to prove that they have a compelling interest. Most of us would agree that back at the beginning of this in March, they probably had a compelling interest. Everybody's watching Italy fall apart, hospitals be overrun, and so government had a compelling interest to stop that from happening here in the United States. The next question, though, is did they intervene in a way that was least restrictive and narrowly tailored? Now, I would certainly argue, and most of these lawsuits argue, they did not do that, and that's why we're winning some of those lawsuits. But let's look at those three things real quick. And here's a comparison for you in terms of when government intervenes in these ways. At times of war, your liberty does get restricted sometimes, and the president's at the apex of his power. The executive branch has the most power it'll ever have is at time of war. Well, at time of public health crisis, then your governors and your local governments, and mayors and counties and whatnot, they have their apex of power. This is the time when they have the most power. And that's why it is so important to make sure those powers are used appropriately. If you go back to March, as I said then, we should have a certain level of public trust that the doctors and the health professionals that are on the front lines, that they will make the right calls. That these extreme measures are not overreactions, but in fact reasonable responses to the current threat. I even said at that time that you might disagree with the assessment, but save yourself the heartburn and the stress and focus instead on what you can control, not on the things you can't control. They're going to do some of these things. This is their moment, I said. I said they've got the power and the right to make these calls, so let them do that, have some public trust, and just make the most of this time at home with your family. Read that book you hadn't had a chance to read, binge watch that show you've been wanting to watch, read through the entire Bible would be a great thing to do. And I suggested at the time, use this time to study your constitutional rights and teach others to do the same. Well, that was mid-March. Since that time, look at what's happened. The mayors and the governors have gone way beyond anything ever done in American history. Again, like I said, we gave them the inch, they took the mile. And literally, no exaggeration. They have become emperors with no accountability. They've trampled our rights. They've taken that 2 weeks of public trust that we gave them, and they've turned it into 2 months of public abuse. And now some of them are threatening to keep their dictator-like orders in place for more than a year. In other words, they've blown it. They have destroyed our economy over something that has turned out to not be much worse than the number of deaths in a very bad influenza season. And I know some people hate that comparison, but it's true and it's accurate. Look at the data, look at the numbers. Now, they have violated our trust. They have violated our rights, and now they're refusing to let up. So that's happened since March. And that makes my encouragement back then in March to study the Constitution even more important today than when I said that in March. I believe at this point the only way that we're going to end this tyranny is by knowing our rights and then defending and asserting those rights. So we need you to become a Constitution coach, become a volunteer with us. Use our online tools to host a class online with your friends and family across the nation. We have got to educate more people on their rights. Send people to this website, send people to these videos, and then get them in a Constitution class. If you don't want to host one, then give them the links to one that is being hosted, but it's so easy and it'll encourage you, I'm telling you. It'll give you a community connection. It'll give you a sense of inspiration and entertainment and education. We're giving these Constitution classes away for free. We're giving you all of our tools for free. And so I hope you'll take up that challenge. You know, we're letting people sign up as a Constitution host for free during these COVID crackdowns, and we've got about 1,000 already across the nation that have signed up and are starting to host classes. We need you to be one of those. We need you to join. So follow those links to becoming a volunteer. Get signed up as a host. Start hosting a class in just the next few days. I mean, this needs to be done now. Get your friends and family in on Zoom with you. They'll be able to interact with you, and y'all can go with me to Independence Hall. I'll teach you the Constitution right there in the room where it was framed. It's more important than ever. It's time for us to stand up as citizens, and to do that, we've got to know our rights. Keep watching these videos. We're going to address some of those additional questions. I'm Rick Green. This has been today's Constitutional Minute.